Hello, I'm eerily Andrew Crichton, and you're fiendishly watching Ghostly Weekly. Halloween is nigh, and that means carving faces into produce, stuffing pets into costumes, and playing Russian roulette with type 2 diabetes by ingesting industrial-strength amounts of candy. Perhaps you leave out bowls of sweets for neighborhood trick-or-treaters. I don't, because I believe in practical gifts. And a bottle of ibuprofen for you? Ever wonder what goes into the sugar that goes into your coffee? That sugar you're buying costs more because of sugar cronyism, and a bunch of sugar barons are getting rich off us suckers. Why? Big Sugar. And that's not just my drag queen name. It's a reference to the special interests who get rich off government protection. The sugar industry is a big cartel that meters out fun white powder. It's like cocaine, only it makes you fat, and it's legal and much less fun at parties. It's indicative of a broader issue in our country of crony capitalism. These tiny little green dots are where we grow sugarcane. That's because America's climate is wonderfully, spectacularly suited to not grow sugarcane. Sugar magnates compensate for their crummy business model through subsidized loans and laws that protect them from competition, inflating the price of sugar and ensuring a sweet profit. I said no puns! We run our sugar industry with Soviet-style central planning, which, granted, has historically been a great way to mass-produce low-quality automobiles and starvation. Let's say there's a surplus of sugar. The government has to buy the extra sugar and resell it at a loss. Or, if the market price drops below a certain level, the USDA has to activate a Sugar for Ethanol program to find the sugar industry new buyers. Not many other industries get that kind of treatment. If nobody wants to buy my jokes, I don't get to sell them to ethanol plants. I have to give them for free to Jimmy Fallon. When you add in the onerous tariffs the government imposes on foreign sugar, we're stuck with expensive American sugar, which is also one of my drag names. Sugar costs are why Chicago is no longer the candy capital of the world, why Oreo and York Peppermint Patty and Hershey's have moved out of the country, and why Willy Wonka is dead. A report from the International Trade Administration found that nearly 3 jobs in candy making were lost for every 1 sugar-growing job protected. Unnecessary handouts are indicative of a broader issue in our economy. Sugar companies have a virtual monopoly on production, but they don't have a monopoly on handouts. Here's a list of other industries that receive unnecessary handouts.
The Monster Mash.
It was a graveyard smash.
He did the mash.
It caught on in a flash.
He did the mash.
Slop around a few $1 billion here and a few $1 billion there, and pretty soon we're robbing Americans and jacking up the national debt. Democrats and Republicans and Libertarians and Methodists and my friend Steve should all come together to stop this sugary graft. America's sugar program is an unwieldy mechanism designed to enrich a few plutocratic sugar babies. I said no puns, and we're not going to do them. Hello, you're watching Mostly Weekly, and I am unfortunately Andrew Heaton. Puerto Rico, it's Spanish for rich port, which is sort of ironic because it's bankrupt. Kind of like how Iceland isn't full of ice, and Greenland isn't very green, and Lonely Island has lots of fans. Islands are liars. But now poor Puerto is even less Rico. A month ago, the vicious Category 4 Hurricane Maria ripped through the island, raising a 50 to 60 mile swath of destruction. But the worst part of this tragedy, and I think we can all agree on this, is that we didn't appreciate Donald Trump enough. But luckily, Puerto Ricans have been spared the onslaught of Donald Trump's Category 5 man-baby tweet storm. Why? Because 90% of Puerto Rico is still without power, and 88% are without cell reception. And it's going to be at least 6 months before power is restored. How is this even possible? To answer that question, we have to rewind the clock 5 months ago to May 3rd, or 2 White House communication directors ago, when Puerto Rico filed for bankruptcy. It couldn't pay the $70 billion it owed to creditors, and that's because the country has been in economic decline since 2006. So to answer why Puerto Rico looked like this, and now looks like this, we have to ask why the island's been in economic freefall since 2006. And the answer is government. That's my final answer. Puerto Rico is without power for 3 reasons. We raised taxes, which led to a deficit, which led to a brain drain, which led to a deficit. The United States and Puerto Rico had been flirting for years since the Spanish-American War. Then the United States finally put a ring on it in 1952 when Puerto Rico became a U.S. Commonwealth. And they decided to raise a couple of beautiful industries together. So the United States showered Puerto Rico with corporate tax breaks. But then the honeymoon phase ended in 1996. The U.S. phased out those tax breaks. Businesses fled the island, and to make up the difference, the Puerto Rican government started binge-eating debt. So, facing a whopping $70 billion debt to Wall Street creditors, many Puerto Ricans bailed for the mainland. The Puerto Rican economy has been so wrecked that there are now more Puerto Ricans living outside of Puerto Rico than in. Bad news for Puerto Rico, but great news for the New York Puerto Rican Pride Parade. This results in a brain drain, and this labor exodus makes paying back a deficit extremely hard. It's like trying to fill a hole, but all you have is more holes. We made imported goods more expensive. In 1920, the U.S. passed the Jones Act, which requires all goods shipped between U.S. ports to be transported by U.S. vessels, meaning that Puerto Rico depends on the U.S. ships, which make imports way more expensive. Which is cool, because it's not like Puerto Rico imports 84% of its food, right? Because that'd be crazy. After the hurricane, President Trump suspended the Jones Act with the breakneck reaction speed of 6 days. But hey, he had more important kneeling-related matters to attend to. However, residents are still suffering from years of artificially high import prices. So even though 43.5% of residents live below the poverty line, it's still crazy expensive to live there. Don't believe me? Psst. Hey, buddy. You want to buy some sugar? Only 40% more than mainland prices. PREPA, Puerto Rico's publicly run electrical grid, adopted a hipster approach to electricity, complete with dilapidated facilities and vintage technology. Instead of using modern energy sources, Puerto Rico still generates 2/3 of its power through burning good old-fashioned petroleum, which is very steampunk and retro and dumb. Why? Because all that oil has to be imported and requires a skilled workforce. So what happens when you have to import expensive oil and handle it with a workforce that's decreased by 1/3 over the past 5 years? This. But there's hope. In a state of emergency, the Puerto Rican government can bypass permits and immediately revoke regulations. Also, private citizens are turning to the black market to put the lights back on. In an ongoing effort to become the Batman, Elon Musk has offered to save Puerto Rico's electrical grid with batteries and solar power, making Puerto Rico the lowest lane of electrical grids. But the more important thing is that Puerto Rico is without power and it was an avoidable catastrophe. We shouldn't have to reach a state of emergency to discover the devastating effects of taxation and excessive regulation. And because Puerto Rico is without power, people are going to die from heat stroke. The clean water supply is restricted, and the supply of food and drugs has shrunk. And worst of all, we didn't sufficiently appreciate Donald Trump. Hello, I'm probably Andrew Heaton, and you're eagerly watching Mostly Weekly, the post office. The answer to the burning question, how can we make emails slower, more expensive, and stressful? Nobody likes the post office, including and especially the people who work there. At this point, the Postal Service is basically a costly way to deliver junk mail. The mail is getting slower, while email, Facebook, and sexting keep increasing in speed and efficiency, making the post office less and less relevant. It's time to update the Postal Service, and the best way to do it? Privatize it. Goodbye, letter. You're private now. Why should we? Well, for one thing, it's hemorrhaging money. Last year, it ran a deficit of nearly $6 billion, and it's been running at a loss for 10 solid years. Since 2007, the post office has lost over $50 billion. That's over 133 billion Catherine Mangue Ward commemorative stamps. The reason it can operate with deficits that large is because the federal government provides a huge line of credit to keep it afloat, which it desperately needs, because the Postal Service has $70 billion worth of unfunded liabilities for its retirees. And you know who will wind up covering that expense? The Postal Service is half government agency and half corporation, combining all of the efficiency of a government agency with the cuddliness of a large corporation. And even though it loses billions of dollars every year, it can't go out of business because it's not really a business. What it really is a monopoly. It is literally illegal for anyone except the Postal Service to deliver letters. The exception is extremely urgent letters, which is the only reason companies like FedEx and UPS are allowed to exist at all. If not for the post office monopoly, they could deliver non-urgent letters like birthday cards, ransom notes, and packets of sea monkeys, just like the Postal Service does. Incidentally, catalogs and junk mail are most of what the Postal Service delivers, not letters. Less than 5% of mail is personal correspondence. Half of all mail is just advertisements nobody wants. That makes the Postal Service a $70 billion spam folder. The only really important thing the Postal Service still takes care of is bills. But I have a feeling people I owe money to will still figure out how to get those bills to me with or without stamps. Damn it! The post office uses revenues from its monopoly mail services to subsidize their express and package delivery services because they lose money on those services. Why? Competition does it better. For example, I can get a package and then order it on Amazon Instant. But whenever the Postal Service tries to find ways to save money, like by scrapping Saturday mail delivery or shutting down inefficient rural offices or automating, their 535 micromanagers in Congress freak out and order them not to. There are 31,000 post offices in America. That's more than all Starbucks and McDonald's combined. And most of them lose money. Maybe that's why they lost $5.6 billion last year. That's why I say privatize the Postal Service. Make the Postal Service compete, but also give it the freedom to be innovative without some crusty senator ordering it around. Other countries have already privatized their postal services in one form or another. The United Kingdom, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, Japan, and that place with hobbits. Now we use email instantaneously and cheaply. We don't send letters, we use Facebook or WhatsApp or Grindr. I mean Tinder. Everyone heard me say Tinder. It was Tinder. The fact of the matter is, times have changed and keep changing. It's time for the post office to catch up and modernize. If you love something, privatize it. Go on, letter, get out of here. I never liked you anyway. Go on, you're better off without me. No matter how painful. If it comes back, that's beautiful. If it goes out of business, well, maybe it was never meant to be. Hello, I'm opportunistically Andrew Heaton, and this is Mostly Weekly, right? So last week, what happened was Hillary Clinton released her memoir about the 2016 election entitled What Happened, to deliver the definitive Clinton explanation of what happened rather than the truly burning question of what the roller coaster it happened. So I had my head writer comb through the book. These were her reactions. Thanks, Sarah. Here's the main takeaway from what happened. Hillary got a sucky deal, but she's also kind of a sucky politician, so it's sort of like seeing someone get shat upon by a bird, but then finding out that that person is Charlie Sheen. Hillary appears to be suffering from early onset IDD, introspection deficit disorder. The book spends a lot of time taking complete ownership of how her actions are all your fault. Come on, Rodham. Even Domino's owned up to their terrible pizza. Don't be the Papa Johns of politicians. So here are the top 3 reasons Hillary Clinton is not President Hillary Clinton, according to not President Hillary Clinton. Number 1, Bernie Sanders. Clinton claims that she lost in part because a disheveled socialist grandpa promised wide-eyed millennials a college tuition farting unicorn. Because Hillary Clinton never ever promised her constituents something unrealistic. No way. No. Number 2, the media. The media, the classic bastion of right-wing conspiracies. Hillary blames the media for its free coverage of Donald Trump, who, yes, did get millions of dollars worth of free airtime by acting like a jackass, when they could have been airing footage of her zingers like this.
I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
So relevant. Number 3, white women. Apparently, some white women did not vote for Hillary Clinton. In an interview, Hillary says, quote, "White women will be under tremendous pressure from fathers and husbands and boyfriends and male employers not to vote for the girl." Okay, I think I get it. So women were sexist against Hillary because they're too weak-willed against the desires of the men in their lives. It's definitely not because some women might have autonomously developed reasons not to vote for Hillary. And although Bernie, the media, and white ladies share the bulk of the blame, what happened has a lot more pages to fill, and so it offers plenty of other scapegoats. Hillary does talk about her own faults, albeit in a way that's, what's that word? Wrong. What some might call constant, repeated lying to the press about financial entanglement, she describes as being guarded. What some might call risking national security, she describes as being technologically flawed. She is a bit vague about her flaws, so let's be specific about them. We noticed a few in the book. She compares crowds shouting "guilty, guilty" at Trump rallies to a scene from Game of Thrones where crowds shouted "shame, shame" at Cersei Lannister. Did anyone tell her that Cersei Lannister is one of the bad guys? She knows that Nurse Ratched isn't the hero, right? Was she rooting for Scar? Another example of her tone deafness is her take on 1984. When describing the purpose of the torture scene,
the goal is to make you question logic and reason, and to sow mistrust toward exactly the people we need to rely on. Our leaders, the press, experts who seek to guide public policy based on evidence.
That's odd, because usually everyone else interprets 1984 as "don't trust the people in power." But there's one person Hillary Clinton was right to blame: Donald Trump. In her book, Hillary called our 45th man-child-in-chief a flagrantly sexist, hateful creep and a clear and present danger to the country and the world. In response, Trump retweeted a gif of himself hitting Hillary with a golf ball. But really, the main person at fault for the failure of Hillary Clinton is Hillary Clinton, the best-selling author of It Takes a Village to Raise Children Who Will Grow Up to One Day Not Vote for You. Fortunately, her new book, What Happened, is already top of the list of bestsellers on Amazon, which is great, because if it wasn't, well, there'd be another book. Hello, I'm Kind of Andrew Heaton, and you're watching Mostly Weekly, mostly. And today, I'd like to talk to you about minimum wage. Every year, I explain why I think minimum wage is a bad idea. That way, I can use hate mail to heat my house. Now the minimum wage is back in the news thanks to places like Seattle, where the city has increased their minimum wage from $11 an hour to $13, and in New York, where a law was just passed raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Listen, I'm on team helping poor people. Hashtag poverty sucks. But we shouldn't make policies based on what their intention is. We should judge them on what their effect is. The effect of jacking up the federal minimum wage is that employees cost an employer more money. So they're apt to cut back on hours or reduce jobs or replace employees with robots. And increasing the minimum wage does lead to more automation, at least according to evil right-wing think tank MIT. To give you an example, this is what happened when I asked for a raise. I'd like a raise?
We're replacing you with a robot.
All right, here he is, Mandroid Heaton. Greetings, evil human. Hello, Mandroid. Can you tell us a little bit about the effects of the minimum wage on labor markets? It's great. Are you just saying that because you think a higher minimum wage will lead to more robots? No, of course not. I'm saying that people can't live off less than $15 an hour, and it's inhumane to vote otherwise. Well, I'm not saying poverty isn't bad. I'm saying that if raising the minimum wage means you don't get a job at all, then the real minimum wage is zero. You're heartless, and I think you humans should jack it up to $30. Hell, why not $60? Okay, if we raised the minimum wage, it would help some people, but it would also lay off a lot of other people. According to the Congressional Budget Office, raising the minimum wage to just $10.10 an hour would lift about 1 million people above the poverty threshold. Great. But it would also mean laying off 500,000 workers. In other words, increasing the minimum wage helps people who have low skills, but it screws over people with the lowest amount of skills. Okay, you need to think big picture. Step 1, raise the minimum wage. Step 2, build Skynet. Is there a step 3? You'll find out. Okay, picture a ladder. Raising the minimum wage is like kicking the bottom rung off that ladder and then bragging about making the bottom rung higher. That's true, but people that are below that new step don't get jobs at all. Plus, minimum wage jobs aren't permanent castes poor people are stuck in. They're mostly entry-level jobs. 2/3 of minimum wage workers move on to a higher salary within a year. About half of minimum wage workers are 16 to 25 years old. The more we raise the minimum wage, the more of them we lock out of the job market, which is really bad news for a high school dropout or a felon looking to get their foot in the door. And maybe some big companies can afford a higher minimum wage, but mom and pop shops can't. For example, Starbucks can afford to pay their employees more. They're a giant company and they could just charge more to spell your name correctly. Local coffee shops don't have that option. They have razor-thin profit margins. Labor is a significant portion of their overhead. So if you raise the minimum wage, there's a real chance you'll drive independent businesses out of business, which helps out big companies, many of which want a higher minimum wage for exactly this reason. In Seattle, businesses have increased the hourly wage of their workers, but they've also cut the amount of hours they work. So workers on net are making less money. And again, I can't stress this enough. The higher we raise the minimum wage, the more robots we have to worry about. It's a bad idea to have a one-size-fits-all price for the entire country. You can pay $2 for a beer in Scabies County, Virginia. Whereas in New York City, if you want to buy a pale ale, you need to kidnap and ransom a toddler. Stuff costs more in big cities. So a grocery store in Gout City, Montana just can't afford to pay $15 an hour to all of its cashiers. Listen, we all have human feelings, and we all consume carbon. But, Sarah, the teleprompter's feeling a little robot-y. You been replaced by a robot?
No.
Okay. Well, anyway, remember, spay and neuter your Rupa. I'm Andrew Heaton, and I'm definitely a human being and not a robot. Hello and welcome. This is Mostly Weekly, and I'm vigorously Andrew Heaton. And this week, we're going to talk about sports. The time we all gather around to watch a muscular stranger put a regulation-sized ball in a specific location. I love the sports. My favorite sports team is the Denver Lemons. But even a die-hard sports person like me knows
Publicly funded sports are overvalued.
I just mean that sports bravado is driving up taxes and tuitions and killing local economies. How? Let's play the balls. Sports mania drives up taxes through stadiums. Major League Soccer is adding 2 new teams to the league, and major U.S. cities are bidding to get them. But, much like a YouTube comments argument, it's more costly to win. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. The winner will likely have to pay $200 million for a stadium. And the winner is the U.S. taxpayer, most of whom think MLS is a genetic disorder. But just listen to these local politicians talk about it.
World-class stadium and a contributor to the economy within the city and the state.
And stadiums will cure cancer and be filled with candy and bring grandma back to life. But every issue has 2 sides. Here are the pros and cons of stadium subsidies as I see them debated. Con: taxpayers will cover at least half of a $200 million stadium plus maintenance. Pro: sports. Con: stadiums literally only benefit sports fans. Non-sports fans or nerds get no return on their tax dollars. Pro: sports. Con: Major League Soccer is a Ponzi scheme. It's been losing money every year, but the estimated valuation has increased 4-fold since 2008. Pro: sports. So remember, if you build it, they will come, completely destroy your economy. Sports mania drives up tuition costs. College football season starts this week, and you know what that means? It means universities are going to continue subsidizing their athletic programs. Rutgers, for instance, charges $1,000 in student fees, or about 8% of total tuition, to subsidize their sports teams. Other schools charge as high as 23% of their total tuition to subsidize their athletic programs. How do they get away with it? They bury it deep within the student fees. Most school athletic programs cost the university money. In 2010, Division I schools spent over $91,000 per student athlete. That's 7 times the amount they spent on regular non-athlete students. Well, at least those lucky student athletes are making bank. What's that? They don't get paid? Okay. Well, at least those lucky student athletes are graduating in droves. Only 55% graduate? Really? What's that? I don't have an earpiece? Sports mania depresses economies. Los Angeles was just chosen as the site of the 2028 Olympics, which is great news for that guy who still owns a Vuvuzela. Los Angeles has already pledged to spend $5 billion, but don't worry, the anticipated revenue is $6 billion, to be split evenly with the International Olympic Committee. But what's a net loss of $2 billion between friends? And this is assuming that the Games will really only cost $5 billion when it cost $20 billion in London and $40 billion in Beijing. Saying the Olympics will only cost $5 billion is like in sports. You know when a hockey lineman is like, I'm totally going to wicket that, and then when push comes to shove, ice. Just look at the ruins of Athens. No, not those ruins, these ruins. That's just 10 years after the 2004 Summer Games, and now most of the facilities have been abandoned. And in general, sports franchises have a negative impact on per capita income. So sports mania drives up tuition and taxes and depresses local economies. How do we fix it? By getting passionate about fiscal responsibility. I know it looks bad out there. The economics are bleak, but you gotta go out with clear eyes, balanced checkbooks, love in your hearts. And by love, I mean cash. By hearts, I mean accounts. Now, I may not know much. I'm just a recovering alcoholic, a former athlete with a colorful backstory trying to get his kids back. But I know this. You gotta have cash to spend cash. You gotta think about the future to have a future. Money's gonna save you. You gotta save money. You gotta talk in one order. Then reverse the order you talk in. Now get out there and stop spending taxpayer money. Go, go, go! I'm Coach Eaton. Thanks for watching Mostly Weekly. Hello, I'm parenthetically Andrew Heaton, and you're watching Mostly Weekly. And today we're going to talk about patent trolls. They're like regular trolls, only balder, paler, and prone to lawsuits. Patents are the legal equivalent of dibs or a temporary monopoly that the government awards to inventors so that after they've developed a new technology, they're rewarded for their efforts. But patent trolls are gaming the system, to the point that the patent system is holding back innovation instead of encouraging it. Patent trolls buy or register stupid or vague patents. Then, when someone invents something awesome, they claim the inventor is using their patent and they sue. That creates a minefield where inventors are afraid to create things for fear they'll step on a patent and blow their legs off. Trolls cost U.S. firms $29 billion in lawsuits every year, and the threat of lawsuits strangles startups and hampers innovation. Like this, or this, it's good for Father's Day, or this, that's a good Valentine's Day present, or this, Christmas. To be awarded a patent, an inventor is supposed to create a new idea which is novel and not just an obvious improvement over an existing idea. Like this. The U.S. Patent Office doesn't nitpick every moron's application, so patent trolls file broad, vague, and weak applications that they can use as flimsy pretenses to lob lawsuits at people. For example, this is an actual patent. It's patented as thermal refreshening of a bread product. Oh, you mean toast? You can't patent friggin' toast! Or this, method of concealing partial baldness. That's a comb-over. You didn't invent comb-overs. If you think toast and comb-overs are overly broad, you're right, you score a point. Which is also a patent. Apple and Samsung had a patent dispute over who owned rectangles with rounded edges. Quit fighting about quadrilaterals. Just build me a robot butler already. For years, patent trolls filed their frivolous lawsuits in East Texas, partly because East Texas was more friendly to patent lawsuits, and also because it's irritating to have to fly to East Texas. So defendants, much like a substitute teacher in her late 30s, are inclined to settle, which is exactly what the trolls want. In the recent case of T.C. Heartland versus Kraft Foods, the Supreme Court ruled that patent lawsuits must be filed wherever the defendant is, which is a big blow to patent trolls. Meanwhile, other patent troll victims have started fighting back. Personal Audio LLC sued Adam Carolla for podcasting, which they claim to own the patent for. Rather than ponying up extortion money, Carolla raised $500,000 through podcasting and threw in another $200,000 of his own to fight them in court. We don't know what the settlement was, but I imagine they didn't make very much money, and they'll probably think twice about trying to extort the podcast community again. Which means I can now fearlessly release my Pogcast, which is a podcast about Pogs. Hey, remember Pogs? Finally, a guy named Alexander Reben developed an algorithm that spits out tens of thousands of invention ideas every day. If a troll patents something in the future and sues someone, the defendant can point to the millions and millions of Reben's ideas that predate it. And some of those ideas are brilliant. Like a shoe tree for one shoe, and a pineapple lily plant that can track people. That's innovation. Trolls aren't on the run, but there's one major step we can take to hobble them. What do trolls fear most? Commitment, obviously, everyone knows that. But after that, fee shifting. Fee shifting means whoever loses the court case pays for all of the legal fees. It's what they do in Canada and Britain, although we only do it for exceptional cases in the United States. If you knew you'd have to pay yours and the defendant's fees if you lost a frivolous patent case, you'd be less likely to register it in the first place. On my end, I'm going to file a patent for being an extortionist dickhead so I can sue the pants off some patent trolls. And that'll show them how the... And apparently the patent for ironic patents has already been patented, so that's great. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a court date, but not for patent violations. For murder. Hello, you're watching Mostly Weekly, and I'm presumably Andrew Heaton. Happy Shark Week. Congratulations to you, sharks, and condolences to you, seals. Do you know who isn't having a good Shark Week or Human Week? Jeff Sessions. Recently, President Trump criticized his attorney general, saying he never should have given him the job. So why is Trump upset? Is it because Jeff Sessions is a megalomaniacal lying leprechaun? No, and darny. Trump is upset because Sessions has recused himself from the Russia investigation, which might be the only smart thing Sessions has done during his tenure. So this week in Arbitrary Challenges, I will list as many reasons as I can why Jeff Sessions is a dick in under 2 minutes. Jeff Sessions is planning a pot crackdown, which is not the fun kind of pot crackdown, which involves pot, crack, and a hoedown. Jeff Sessions has said that marijuana is only slightly less awful than heroin, to which pot advocates say, Sessions is only slightly less awful than Trump. Sessions said he was heartbroken when President Obama said marijuana is not as dangerous as alcohol. Heartbroken? Marijuana not being as dangerous as alcohol is a fact. True heartbreak is finding out that Snooty, the world's oldest manatee, died one day after his birthday last week. R.I.P. Snooty. In 1996, before Jeff Sessions became the cuddly imp we all know and love today, he advocated the death penalty for drug traffickers that were convicted multiple times, including for dealing marijuana. But hey, it was the 90s, and he was just experimenting with cruel and unusual punishments. In May, Jeff Sessions asked Congress to allow him to prosecute medical marijuana providers. So take that, fat, lazy cancer patients. Recently, Jeff Sessions expanded civil asset forfeiture, which allows police officers to ignore state and local laws and seize assets of anyone suspected of a crime. To make an analogy, this would be like if we were playing Go Fish, and you asked if I had any queens, and then I said, give me all the money in your car because drugs. Sessions reportedly believes that the sanctity of life begins at conception, and then apparently ends at birth. Jeff Sessions supports mandatory minimums for nonviolent crimes. So I vote we redefine mandatory minimums to mean height requirements for passing laws. Sessions has come out repeatedly against gay marriage, confirming my new position of redefining marriage as a union between any two people who aren't Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions has come out in support of torture. Also, he looks like a Keebler elf that planted drug evidence in the tree. In March, Jeff Sessions failed to disclose that he met with the Russian ambassador, and Nancy Pelosi called for his resignation. The worst part? Now I have to agree with Nancy Pelosi on something. And worst of all, earlier this year, Jeff Sessions offered to resign, but then didn't go through with it. Made it! So remember, Jeff Sessions is a pasty goblin who favors torture, civil asset forfeiture, and locking people in cages for pot. Thanks for watching. Merry Shark Week to all. Hello, Internet. You're watching Mostly Weekly, and I'm intermittently Andrew Heaton. Interns, the muse of Hollywood studios who like to ask, what if an intern was a hilariously out-of-touch old dude? The answer is hijinks. This summer, millions of students across our great land are working in internships. How do I know? Because we asked our Mostly Weekly intern, Clint, to do some fact-checking and some work around the set. And according to his research, the U.S. has 8 bajillion unpaid interns. So why do companies love unpaid interns? Because the labor is cheap, if not a bit unreliable. We're proud of you, Clint. You're doing. Shut up! Companies want cheap labor, and college students are willing to work for the experience. And job seekers are willing to work for free in order to get a foot in the door of the company they like. But many companies are eliminating their unpaid internship programs altogether. Why? Because most unpaid interns are illegal. In fact, the exact wording says, the employer that provides training derives no immediate advantage from the activities of the intern, and on occasion, its operations may actually be impeded. So in other words, you can hire an unpaid intern, you just can't let them do anything helpfoot. Clint, I think maybe you misspelled helpful in the teleprompter, buddy. No, Clint, don't be like that. Why you got? I'll let you come in at 10. Here's the thing. I think 2 consenting adults should be able to do whatever they want with or to each other. And that includes internships. Unpaid interns meet a network of people you could only meet through the wonderful world of work. And finally understand the movie Office Space.
Yeah.
References. References are an incredibly valuable way to find work you can only get by having work experience in the first place. Back in the days before unpaid internships, I used to give my own number as a reference and pretended to be my own former employer. Boy, Heaton's a great guy, eye for detail, all that stuff. Knows Microsoft Suite and Haggis. All right, it's the bagpipes. Gotta go, Braveheart to you. Well, my word. Andy Heaton's a tall drink of water that never had no drug charges. Another benefit is work lessons. Without an unpaid internship, hey buddy, you've got your finger on the lens. Can you move your finger? Well, you just move your fingers up. That's not doing anything. Okay, I'm just gonna work around you. Work lessons, they're important. You can get them from unpaid internships. There's also a suspicious number of congressmen who have unpaid interns, but also voted to increase the minimum wage, but also use unpaid interns. Hey, Clint, don't walk in front of the green screen. You're not my dad. So for them, it's fine to work for $8 an hour or $0 an hour, but nothing in between. Hashtag Congress logic. Look, unpaid internships aren't ideal. It's better to get paid, I know. But it's also better than not having any opportunities at all. Wanting to ban unpaid internships is like wanting to ban Hot Pockets because we don't have both Hot Pockets and pizza. And let's at least consider things from the perspective of the employer. If the government forces an employer to pay their interns, what possible incentive do they have to hire a 20-something nobody for 80-something days? That's not even enough time to figure out how to work the fax machine, or in Clint's case, fax. I love you, buddy. Shut up! Weirdly, working for free can be an advantage for someone looking to get experience. But companies face increasing legal scrutiny to hire them, which is why we should legalize unpaid... Hello? Hey, Clint, buddy. Well, how'd you get there? I cut the blue wire? Hello, Internet. You're watching Mostly Weekly, and I'm Andrew Heaton. Solamente algunas veces. Cuba, known as Cuba to natives, Cuber to Kennedys, and Daddy to Cuba Gooding Jr. Jr. Cuba is famous for rum, salsa, beaches, and human rights violations. And it's for one of these reasons that the U.S. has an embargo against the whole country. It's the last reason. The Obama administration restored diplomatic ties with Cuba in 2014. He removed it from the terror list and removed travel restrictions. Last year, 600,000 Americans visited Cuba. But now President Trump is reinstating some of those restrictions. American tourists can only travel to Cuba with a government-approved tour group and have to keep all of their receipts and itemized itineraries for 5 years. So we're going to restrict the freedom of people to show that restricting the freedom of people is wrong. Most of Trump's Cuba policy consists of ranting. In fact, he's only partially undoing Obama's reforms, but he might go further. America's embargo on Cuba kicked off in 1958. which means if singer-songwriter Ed Sheeran were a unit of time, the embargo is now 2 Ed Sheerans old. So what have we learned in these past Sheerans? We've learned that the Cuban embargo doesn't work, but even if it did, it shouldn't exist. I should be able to buy stuff from whoever I want, and I just so happen to like Cuban cigars. Delicious. And as a free citizen, I should be able to travel to any country and/or planet we're not at war with. There are countries with terrible human rights records that we can still travel to. Venezuela, Iran, Mordor. Now, some people think these restrictions of our freedom are justified because the embargo hurts a dreadful communist regime. Only problem is, it doesn't. The Cuban embargo doesn't hurt communist leaders. It hurts the Cuban people, especially the poor. Food shortages led to a 33% drop in caloric intake between 1989 and 1993. And the ban makes it hard for the poor today to access necessities like medical supplies, toilet paper, and fidget spinners. And Cuba can already trade with the rest of the world. So if they want a Western good, they can just trade with Europe for their fix of wooden shoes, silly monarchs, alcoholism, and war memorials. So the embargo is hurting them, but it's also hurting us. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimates that each year, the embargo costs the United States $1.2 billion in sales and exports. The embargo is the international equivalent of trying to get what you want by holding your breath. The embargo is a relic of Cold War thinking, like huge military spending or homoerotic volleyball scenes. It's been 2.5 Kendall Jenners, and still the embargo has failed to achieve its goal of pressuring Cuba to adopt a representative democracy. But the communist government can use the embargo to blame America for its own dumbass socialist failures. And look, we're all on board about hating communists. It's a terrible system, and the Cuban government in particular is a human rights disaster. Plus, it's so humid. In any case, the fact that Cuba's government sucks doesn't make the embargo a good idea. But Donald Trump and others want to keep the embargo and the travel restrictions going. So here's what I propose. If you want to keep the embargo, go ahead. Donald Trump, feel free to not visit Cuba as much as you want. Anyone who wants to keep the ban can be my guest. As for me, I'm going to enjoy a nice Cuba Libre. It's robust. Mostly weekly. I'm Andrew Heaton. Hasta luego. Hello, I'm Vigorously Andrew Heaton, and you're watching Mostly Weekly. Now, I'm sure that you had the same thoughts I did watching the Comey testimony. This is like the BDSM stuff from 50 Shades of Grey, and I think the parallels are pretty self-evident.
I understood that I served at the pleasure of the president. The pleasure of the president.
The pleasure of the president.
He couldn't possibly be having dinner with me alone. I mean, this is the president of the United States. He told me repeatedly, with me alone,
the pleasure of the president.
saying, I hope this. I took it as, this is what he wants me to do. This is what he wants me to do. I took it repeatedly. This is what he wants me to do.
The pleasure of the president.
God, that's hot. Did you see those stenographers? This is as good a time as any to tell you that I am a bureausexual. I am aroused by procedural things in government. So this was a great week for me. Not so much for James Comey, whose testimony about Trump's behavior had some strong parallels with sexual harassment. Let's go through the facts. Comey is stunned when President-elect Trump invites him to a private dinner where he asks him for something inappropriate, so much so that Comey is stunned and unresponsive. And if there is an investigation, there'll be an independent prosecutor, a congressional probe, an inquest of some sort, a lot of procedural stuff. Excuse me, I need to get something notarized.
The clerk will report H.R. 40.
Yeah, you read that docket. The Donald is clearly a dominant, like Christian Grey. We went home with a billionaire who spent a year negging America. And I know a lot of voters that have low self-esteem would like to stay with him, but the issue here is abuse of power. And unlike Anastasia, we never signed a contract saying we wanted to feel violated, which is why I think the world of politics could learn some things from BDSM. Both of them involve power structures, consent, and in some cases, bondage. Here's some proposals. Government safe words. I suggest that citizens can use a safe word when the power abuse just isn't fun anymore. Pineapple!
Number 1, step 4.
Okay, haberdasher. Tippy toe. Hey! Tippy toe. Denial play. Legislators deny themselves the pleasure of passing laws. It's like political edging. I propose that just like doms and subs sometimes switch places, we get to trade places with the government. So for a couple of days a year, we get to wield the sex baton and affirmative consent. Let's talk about this. From now on, no more 10-term senators, no more automatic spending increases, and no more creeping regulation. Anything the government wants to do to us, it has to get affirmative, proactive consent from us. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some jury duty to attend. That's the stenographer that I've been... Goodbye. Hello, Internet. I'm primarily Andrew Heaton, and you're watching Mostly Weekly. And I'll bet you clicked that headline because you want to see boobs. Well, what if I told you that was clickbait, pervert, and we're actually going to talk about the FCC? No, I'm just kidding. We're going to talk about boobs, and to a lesser extent, the FCC. Now, I can show you side boob, inner boob, under boob, or quantum boob, but I can't show you a composite of all four, because that would be wrong. The FCC, for example, considers female nipples a sexual organ. But what makes the areola a sexual organ? The gender of the person it belongs to. Which brings us to America's favorite game show, Name That Nipple. Is this nipple Selma Hayek's or Paul Giamatti's? And censorship is a weird concept to begin with. For all the thought the FCC puts into nippledom, they don't bother regulating violence. So I could show you this, but I couldn't show you this. We should be able to show both. Now, if you were offended by that, know that that human female is my head writer, Sarah, who both wrote and approved that joke. Isn't that right, Sarah? Thanks, Sarah. Now, there's one group of people that aren't afraid of boobs, and that's babies. But if they're allergic to formula, they're in trouble because it's hard to buy breast milk. And breast milk is incredibly healthy for infants. And even bodybuilders are trying to use it for growing muscles. Because who's more jacked than a baby? But between 1% and 5% of women in the US don't produce enough breast milk to feed their kids. In fact, when I Google breast milk, one of the top suggested searches to pop up is for sale. Now, despite the huge demand, it's incredibly difficult to buy breast milk, even though there's more than enough supply. There are only 24 donation-based milk banks in all of North America, and they don't have enough milk. And even when they do, it'll set you back up to $4 an ounce, which is about $600 a week for most mothers. Breast milk doesn't have to be the cognac of body fluids. We can compensate women for their milk. That'll increase the supply while making it cheaper for needy mothers. And that's exactly what the internet did. This amazing site offers breast milk for as low as 50 cents an ounce, and they even have different categories. There's organic and gluten-free and vegan, if you want your baby to grow up to be a commie. But for now, businesses like this are operating in a gray market, which means it's about this legal. The FDA sees breast milk marketplaces as a liability, and local lawmakers see it as exploitative. So let's turn the gray market into a great market. So I see only two solutions. One, breast milk exchange companies coat the exterior of their building in female nipples. That way they'll be obscured from view and can operate privately and securely. Or we could update the way we see breasts as just another beautiful part of the human anatomy, and women can do whatever they want with their own bodies. And look, I'm all for being ashamed of our bodies because I'm a wasp. But I think we should be ashamed of every part of our body, not just the breasts. Well, thanks for watching Mostly Weekly. I'm somewhat Andrew Heaton. Or am I? Hello, I'm allegedly Andrew Heaton, and this is Mostly Weekly. Thursday, the FCC voted to begin the process of peeling back Obama-era internet regulations. In other words, the internet is free-balling again. So what is net neutrality? It sounds like a volleyball competition in Switzerland, but actually, it's a thing that regulates the internet, the place where I do most of my shopping, Jeeves asking, and you're facing. Your Face is my startup where you post pictures of things and then people rate how much they look like your face. Net neutrality forbids internet providers from charging different rates or providing different speeds for different data. It does so by defining the internet as a public utility through a law literally designed for 19th century railroads. Which reminds me of my app, Strangers on a Train. You know when you need to murder someone? Well, this allows you to swap murders with someone on the train. Hashtag MurderShare. Before this FCC vote, the government could micromanage the internet. And in case you've forgotten, this is the government. The FCC is the governmental body regulating the internet, the selfsame agency tasked with regulating Janet Jackson's nipple slips and Steve Colbert's use of the phrase cock holster. Damn it! The internet is nipple slips and cock holsters. The alternative policy is not fiddling with it, which is exactly how the internet operated until February of 2015. Despite what you're reading on Twitter, corporations did not just take over the internet. These net neutrality rules have only been around 2 years. Before that, for the last 30 years, the internet didn't have those rules, and I think it worked out pretty well, with the exception of 4chan, Salon.com, and pop-up ads. Once net neutrality is repealed, companies are free to charge premium rates and speeds, which is completely normal in other industries. Even the post office has priority mail, standard, first class, and lost. To make an analogy, there are these things called highways, and net neutrality effectively mandates that the passing lane goes the same speed as the right lane, with that stupid old person from Florida who won't turn off her goddamn blinker. And look, I get why people hate cable providers. They're terrible. But Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Amazon are also big, scary corporations, and they support net neutrality, which seems ominous. Almost as if large corporations like regulatory burdens that mostly affect small startups. Please like and subscribe. Net neutrality is supposed to stop cable companies from slowing down websites they don't like that refuse to pay them. The only problem is this has never actually happened. The closest thing occurred in 2010 when Metro PCS offered a budget data plan that had unlimited YouTube streaming, but not unlimited Netflix and Hulu because it was harder to compress them. So net neutrality is a solution in search of a problem. And here's a list of other things that sound like problems, but aren't. The other big, dark hypothetical is that cable companies will block or censor websites they don't like, which has happened exactly 0 times. We don't know how the internet's going to evolve, or what kind of interesting holographic pornography we'll be into 10 years from now. It could be that we'll need super ultra-fast service to watch that holo porn, but we can use older, slower service to say mean things about me on YouTube. We don't know how the internet's going to evolve, and neither does the FCC. John Oliver made net neutrality a cause du jour, but one of the problems those of us who disagree have is we don't even have a slogan we can fit on a bumper sticker. So how about organic internet? Quit fiddling with it. He also started a website called GoFCCYourself.com for fans to register their support of net neutrality. Well, if you support an organic internet, you can go to our website that we started. FCCYouKnowMe.com. I am told that's a rap thing. You can go there and play Minesweeper because the internet works best doing its own thing. Good day. Hello there. I'm virtually Andrew Heaton, and this both is and is not Mostly Weekly. Political parties, which comes to us from the Latin politus partice, meaning to screw over. Historically, political parties have been dedicated to pretending that they are consistent and dedicated. But since the 2016 election, Republicans are acting like Democrats, and Democrats are acting like Republicans. It's almost as if, oh my God, they've been Freaky Friday, like in one of those hacky movies where people switch bodies. Think about it. Republicans are protectionists now. Democrats are defending free trade. Republicans want a woman in power. Democrats hate a woman in power. Republicans are in bed with the Soviets. Megyn Kelly is hosting the Today Show. Trump's on the Tonight Show. Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. And Republican sex scandals are heterosexual. That used to be the other side's thing. When I was a kid, Republicans had wholesome, homosexual sex scandals. Whatever happened to consistency? That's not even including all of Donald Trump's reversals. Mark Cuban, he's a saint. He's the best shark on Shark Tank. No, I'm not a Republican, but I am ethnically Republican. I was born on a golf course wearing khaki, and I greeted my mother with a firm handshake. But when I went to college, there were only 2 options, Democrat or virgin. So I guess you could say I've been a Democrat 3 times. What happened after college, you ask? Well, as the saying goes, if you're young and a conservative, you have no heart. And if you're old and liberal, you have no brain. And if you're libertarian, you believe you should be able to sell your organs for profit on an open market. So I was born with a good credit rating, but I experimented with vegetarianism in college. I have swung both ways. Yet now the parties are switching places. I thought parties were supposed to stand for something. Damn it, consistency is important. What else but a Freaky Friday scenario can account for Republicans reversing their position on states' rights? Republicans didn't want laws made by some corrupt moron in Washington, D.C. They wanted laws made by some local corrupt moron. And now Attorney General Jeff Sessions wants to crack down on states that legalize marijuana. Republicans spent the last 8 years lambasting executive orders, but now that Trump, a Republican, is issuing dozens of them, Republicans are suspiciously quiet. Once again, consistency is important. So Republicans are acting against states' rights, which is a pretty strange about-face. Almost as if Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell made a wish to trade places over a cursed fortune cookie. Freaky Friday. But what does it matter that Republicans and Democrats have Freaky Friday'd and changed places? It doesn't. Spending will still stay high, wires will still be tapped, and I will never find true love. It's like if 9/11 conspiracy theorists and flat earthers switched places for the day. They'd still be wrong, they would have just swapped positions. Unlike libertarians, who've been consistently principled, often to the point of exhaustion. For decades, libertarians have stood for legalizing pot, gay marriage, welcoming immigrants, free markets, and polling at 2%. That's consistency. Well, thanks for watching Mostly Weekly. I'm Andrew Heaton, consistently. Hello, I'm usually Andrew Heaton, and this is Mostly Weekly. Mostly? It's like a Craigslist version of John Oliver. This week, journalists, Hollywood starlets, and Trump administration officials will all congregate in Washington, D.C. They're to pretend that our nation's capital is hip and glamorous instead of a self-important nerd bog. I speak, of course, of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, a boozy soiree that I refuse to attend. Look, the White House Correspondents' Dinner isn't a good thing. You don't want politicians and journalists getting chummy. There's a reason that we keep animals separated in zoos, and that's not to keep them from fighting. It's to keep them from forming alliances. So I refuse to attend. Hello, yes, it's me. I can make it. I have an ask out of my trunk. Uncle Bill, just used Safari. No, I'm all in favor of journalists binge drinking and chain smoking, or even moonlighting as superheroes. But an important part of being a journalist is throwing rocks at whoever's in power. Left or right, print or TV, journalists need to come together to make the president's life hell. Democracy works best when media and power have an antagonistic relationship. It's like if your parents have a divorce and they're competing for your love through expensive gifts. If you want that Nerf gun for Christmas, you better tell Dad that Mom is getting plowed by the tennis instructor. Shindigs like the White House Correspondents' Dinner throw the whole Washington ecosystem out of whack. And when that happens... I can go. I have a cummerbund. Hello? Jennings, I can't talk about Star Trek right now. I'm doing a thing. Yeah, Kelsey Grammer's in Star Trek. He's in The Next Generation. He plays Captain Morgan Bateson. He cries every movie. They made Spock an emo Vulcan. Hey, Jennings, I gotta go. I'm still doing that thing. Where was I? Now, you might be thinking, hey, the White House Correspondents' Dinner is kind of like a roast. Sometimes the speaker is antagonistic, like when George W. Bush got destroyed by Steve Colbert, or that time Jimmy Carter got ripped apart by a tiger. But most of the time, the people there are getting along, inflating each other's egos, following each other on Instagram, and entirely forgetting me. I believe journalists should keep a respectable, emotional distance from politicians because I'm a WASP, and I believe everyone should be emotionally unavailable.
Yes, emotions are hard.
Here's a suggestion. Have you tried making a graph? Also, the Fourth Estate, Speaking Truth to Power, Free Press, and so on and so forth. You've read it. So instead of a White House Correspondents' Dinner, I've compiled a list of approved events politicians and journalists can participate in. You can read that while I drink scotch. Because here's the crux of it. Right now, the media loves pelting President Trump, and that's great. They should absolutely be doing that. But 4 years from now, they're going to give a free pass to President Oprah. Last year, under the Obama administration, we bombed 7 countries. But journalists wanted to talk about North Carolina's stupid bathroom law. Because of the drug war, we have the largest prison population on the planet. But we heard more stories about Pokemon Go. And the truly important thing... Hello? Yes, I can go. Okay. Sure. Yeah, I'll sit in Tucker Carlson's lap. That's fine. Okay, I'll be there in a minute. Thank you. I have to go to a business convention at the workplace. Good chat. Good day.